The crack of a gunshot echoed across the plains as Quentin Holcomb watched a doe drop, his rifle still warm in his hands. It was May 1872, and another day of hunting meant another day his children wouldn't go hungry. 3 years a widower, and the weight of raising 4 young ones alone still pressed down on him like the unforgiving Montana sun. Quentin lowered his weapon, sighing as he prepared to dress the deer. His ranch awaited 15 miles east, where his children alone save for his elderly father were counting on his return before nightfall. The life of a cattle rancher in Montana Territory wasn't what Quentin had envisioned when he'd brought his beloved wife Sarah west from Illinois. They had been so full of dreams, building their modest spread with plans for a future together. But childbirth had taken her after their 4th child, leaving Quentin with an infant daughter and a hollow space where his heart used to beat. Slinging the dressed deer across his horse, he mounted up and headed home. The endless prairie stretched before him, the distant mountains standing sentinel over his solitary figure. Quentin's weathered face, browned by sun and etched with lines of worry, betrayed his 32 years. His once bright blue eyes had dulled since Sarah's passing, and his wheat-colored hair now showed strands of premature gray beneath his wide-brimmed hat. The sun hung low on the horizon by the time he approached his property. Something was different. Smoke curled from the chimney, not unusual, but a second horse was hitched outside, one he didn't recognize. Quentin's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he approached cautiously. Through the window, he caught sight of unfamiliar movement. A woman stood at his stove, her back to the window as she stirred something in a pot. His children sat at the table, laughing a sound he hadn't heard in months. Dismounting quickly, Quentin secured his horse and the deer carcass before approaching the door, hand still near his weapon. He pushed the door open, stepping inside with the wariness of a man who'd learned that life offered few mercies. "Papa's home," his eldest, 8-year-old William called out. The woman turned, startled by his entrance. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun and green eyes that widened at the sight of him. Her dress was modest but clean, unlike many who traveled through these parts. "Mr. Holcomb," she said with a slight nod, "I hope you don't mind. Your father wasn't feeling well, and your children were hungry." Quentin's gaze darted to the corner where his father sat in his rocking chair, looking embarrassed but not unwell. "This is Miss Tessa Nelson," his father explained. "Her wagon broke an axle about 2 miles down the road. She was traveling to Helena, and I offered her shelter for the night." Quentin removed his hat, nodding stiffly. "Madam, I've made venison stew," she said, gesturing to the pot. "Your father said you'd likely bring something back from hunting. I hope that's all right." The smell hit him then, rich, hearty, with herbs he didn't recognize. It had been years since anyone had properly cooked in this kitchen. Since Sarah. "The children have been helping me," Tessa continued, seeming to sense his discomfort. "Emma is quite skilled with a potato peeler for a 3-year-old. His youngest beamed from her place at the table where she sat next to her siblings. William, 6-year-old Mary, and 5-year-old James. "Miss Tessa makes biscuits like angels made them," Mary declared solemnly. Something twisted in Quentin's chest pain, yes, but something else too. His children looked happy. Federal cared for in a way his fumbling attempts at domesticity had never managed. "I'm grateful for your help, Miss Nelson," he said finally, setting his hat on the hook by the door. "But I need to see to your wagon. You shouldn't have to stay longer than necessary." Hurt flickered across her face before she composed herself. "Of course. I understand." "No!" Emma cried out, running to clutch at Tessa's skirts. "Miss Tessa, stay." Quentin sighed, kneeling to his daughter's level. "Miss Nelson has her own journey to make, Emma. She can't stay here." "Why not?" William asked, frowning. We have room. That's enough, Quentin said more sharply than he'd intended. We won't keep Miss Nelson from her travels. A tense silence fell over the room. Tessa cleared her throat. Supper's ready, she said softly. You must be hungry after your hunt. The meal passed in awkward conversation, the children chattering excitedly to Tessa while Quentin ate silently, watching. She had a gentle way with them that reminded him painfully of Sarah. The way she'd cut James's meat without making him feel like a baby. How she'd known to add extra carrots to William's portion because he'd mentioned liking them. The patience with which she listened to Mary's endless questions. After the children were tucked into bed, Quentin found Tessa washing dishes in the kitchen. You don't need to do that, he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. I don't mind, she replied without turning around. It's the least I can do for your hospitality. About your wagon, he began. I'll ride out at first light to take a look. If it's just an axle, I might be able to repair it. She nodded. Thank you. I'd appreciate that. A moment of silence stretched between them before he asked, What takes you to Helena, if you don't mind my asking? Tessa set a plate aside, drying her hands on a towel before facing him. My husband died last winter. Influenza. I'm going to stay with my cousin and her husband. They own a millinery shop and need help. I'm sorry about your husband, Quentin said, meaning it. As I am about your wife, she replied softly. Your father told me. Quentin stiffened. Did he now? He's proud of how you've managed with the children, Tessa added quickly. It can't be easy. It's not, Quentin admitted, surprising himself with his candor. But they're my responsibility. They're wonderful children, she said, smiling slightly. You've done well with them. Quentin snorted. You saw them today. They're half wild. I can barely keep them clean and fed, let alone teach them proper manners. Children need love more than they need perfect manners, Tessa said. And it's clear they have that in abundance. Something in her words pierced through the armor he'd built around his heart. This woman, a stranger, had seen in one afternoon what he'd been too busy surviving to notice, that despite his failings, his children were thriving in their own way. You can have my room tonight, he said abruptly. I'll sleep in the barn. That's not necessary. It is, he interrupted. It's the only proper arrangement. Tessa sighed but nodded. Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Quentin, he corrected, then wondered why he had. Quentin, she repeated, his name sounding different in her voice. Thank you. He nodded once and retreated to the barn, where he lay awake far longer than he should have, thinking of auburn hair and the smell of herbs in his kitchen again. Morning came too quickly. Quentin rose before dawn, as was his habit, to find Tessa already in the kitchen. She wore the same dress as yesterday, her hair freshly braided, and was mixing batter in a bowl. You're up early, he observed. She jumped slightly. I hope you don't mind. I thought I'd make breakfast before you went to look at my wagon. That's kind, but unnecessary. Please, she said, meeting his eyes. Let me do this. Your children should have a proper breakfast. Something in her earnest expression made him nod and sit at the table. Soon, the smell of flapjacks filled the kitchen, and one by one, the children appeared, drawn by the aroma. His father joined them too, giving Quentin a meaningful look that he studiously ignored. After breakfast, Quentin saddled his horse and prepared to ride out to Tessa's wagon. To his surprise, she joined him in the yard. I should come along, she said. My belongings are still there. He hesitated, then nodded, extending his hand. You'll have to ride with me. Tessa accepted his help onto the horse, settling behind him. The feeling of her arms around his waist was strange, intimate in a way he hadn't experienced in years. They rode in silence, her presence warm against his back. The wagon sat where she'd described, the broken axle evident even from a distance. Quentin helped Tessa down and examined the damage. "It's not too bad," he concluded. "But I'll need to bring tools and lumber. It'll take a day or two to repair." Tessa bit her lip, looking troubled. "I don't want to impose any longer than necessary." "It's not an imposition," Quentin said, surprising himself again. "The children, they seem happy having you there." She smiled tentatively. "They're sweet. They miss their mother." "Yes," Quentin agreed, throat tight. "They do." They gathered what she needed from the wagon, a small trunk of clothing and personal items, plus a box of cooking supplies. As they prepared to return to the ranch, Quentin noticed a small framed photograph among her belongings. "Your husband?" he asked softly. Tessa nodded, handling the frame with care. "Thomas. We were married 3 years. No children." Pain flickered across her face. "No, it wasn't meant to be." There was a story there, Quentin sensed, but it wasn't his place to pry. Instead, he helped her secure her belongings before they mounted the horse together. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. Quentin worked on repairing Tessa's wagon, bringing the parts back to his barn so he could work while still being close to home. Tessa, meanwhile, seemed to transform the house. She cleaned areas that had been neglected for years, organized the pantry, and taught the girls simple sewing while keeping the boys occupied with tasks that channeled their energy. His father watched it all with knowing eyes, commenting one evening as they sat on the porch, "She's good for this family." Quentin bristled. "She's passing through, Pa, don't get attached. Don't let the children get attached." "Too late for that," the older man said mildly. "But I wasn't talking about the children." Quentin stood abruptly. "The wagon will be ready tomorrow. She'll be gone the day after." "A shame," his father murmured. Inside, Quentin found Tessa reading to the children by lamplight, her voice changing for each character in the story. They were enthralled, even William, who normally considered himself too old for such things. Quentin stood in the doorway, unnoticed, watching as she brought the tale to life. When she finished, the children protested, begging for another story. "Tomorrow," she promised, kissing each forehead. "Now off to bed with you." They obeyed with minimal grumbling, a minor miracle in itself. As they filed past Quentin, each hugged him good night before scampering off to their rooms. Tessa looked up, finally noticing his presence. "They're good listeners," she said, closing the book. "They're never that well behaved for me," he admitted. Tessa smiled. Children respond to routine and consistency. It's not easy for one person to provide both while also running a ranch. "No," he agreed, "it's not." A moment of understanding passed between them. She knew the struggle he faced daily, not just the physical labor, but the emotional toll of trying to be both mother and father to 4 young children. "The wagon will be ready tomorrow," he said finally. "Oh," her smile faltered slightly. "That's good. Thank you for your help. I'll take you to Helena the day after," Quentin continued. "It's too dangerous for a woman to travel alone." "I managed to get this far," Tessa pointed out. "And broke an axle," he countered. The road to Helena can be treacherous, and there are unsavory types who wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of a woman traveling alone. She seemed about to argue, then nodded. "Thank you. That's very kind." That night, Quentin again found sleep elusive. The thought of the house without Tessa's presence left him unsettled. In less than a week, she'd brought life back into rooms that had been merely functional for years. The children laughed more. Even his father seemed more energetic, engaging with the children instead of watching from his corner. And Quentin himself? He'd caught himself smiling more than once, something that had become rare since Sarah's death. But Tessa had her own life, her own plans. She was a widow heading to a new start, not looking to take on a ready-made family in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't fair to even consider asking her to stay. The next day passed too quickly. Quentin finished the wagon repairs by mid-afternoon, and Tessa spent the day baking extra bread and preparing food for the journey ahead. The children, sensing her imminent departure, clung to her more than usual. That evening after supper, little Emma climbed into Tessa's lap as she sat by the fire. "Don't go," the child pleaded, her small hands clasping Tessa's face. Tessa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Oh, sweetheart, I have to. But who will make biscuits?" James asked seriously. "And tell stories?" Mary added. "And teach us about plants?" William contributed. Tessa looked helplessly at Quentin, who felt his own throat tighten. "Miss Nelson has her own family waiting for her," he explained gently. "We can't keep her from them." "Could you come back?" Mary asked hopefully. "For a visit?" Tessa stroked the girl's hair. "Helena is very far, sweet one." "Children, that's enough," Quentin said, more gruffly than intended. "Miss Nelson has been very kind to stay as long as she has. Now it's time to get ready for bed." With reluctant goodbyes, the children hugged Tessa once more before filing off to bed. Quentin followed to tuck them in, a routine that took longer than usual as each child expressed their sorrow at Tessa's departure. When he returned to the main room, his father had retired and Tessa sat alone by the fire, her expression distant. "They'll be fine," Quentin said, taking the chair opposite her. "Children are resilient." Tessa nodded, blinking rapidly. "They're wonderful children. You should be proud." "I am," he agreed, "though I can't take all the credit. Sarah. She laid a good foundation." Tessa smiled softly. "Tell me about her, if you don't mind." Quentin hesitated. He rarely spoke of Sarah, finding the pain too raw even 3 years later. But something about Tessa's gentle inquiry made him want to share. "She was brave," he began. "Braver than me. Coming west was my dream, not hers, but she never complained. Not when we lived in a tent that first winter. Not when the crops failed the second year. Not when William got so sick we thought we might lose him." He stared into the fire, memories washing over him. "She loved to sing. Couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but that didn't stop her. The children loved it." Tessa smiled. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Quentin agreed. "And then Emma came along, and there were complications." He trailed off, the familiar ache spreading through his chest. "I'm so sorry," Tessa said softly. They sat in companionable silence for a while before Quentin asked, "What about your husband? Thomas, was it?" Tessa nodded. "He was a schoolteacher. Gentle, patient. We met when I was 17. He came to our town to take over the school. My father didn't approve at first. Thought Thomas was too bookish to provide properly." Her smile turned sad. "He was right in some ways. Thomas wasn't practical about money. We struggled, but he was kind and he loved me. That seemed enough." "It should be," Quentin murmured. "When he got sick, it happened so fast," Tessa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "One day he was teaching, the next he was burning with fever. 3 days later he was gone." "And you decided to come west?" "There was nothing left for me there," she explained. "My parents are gone, no siblings. Thomas's family never quite approved of me. When my cousin wrote offering a position in her shop, it seemed like providence." Quentin studied her in the firelight. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a strength to her that reminded him of the frontier women who thrived out here, a resilience that couldn't be taught. "Helena might not be what you expect," he warned. "It's growing, but it's still rough. A millinery shop sounds genteel, but the clientele might not be." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Tessa said, lifting her chin slightly. Or of rough edges. I've managed on my own for almost a year now. I don't doubt it, Quentin said. He trailed off, unsure how to express his concern without sounding condescending. You're worried, she finished for him. It's kind of you, but I'll be fine. Their eyes met across the space between them, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or something more. We should turn in, Quentin said finally, breaking the moment. We'll leave at first light. Tessa nodded, rising gracefully. Good night, Quentin. Good night, Tessa. As he prepared for bed in the barn again, Quentin wondered when they had transitioned to first names so easily. It felt natural, as so many things had with her presence. Too natural, perhaps. The journey to Helena would take 3 days with the wagon. Quentin had arranged for his neighbor, a reliable man with 3 sons of his own, to check on his father and children while he was gone. It wasn't ideal, but it was necessary. He couldn't let Tessa make the journey alone. They set out early the next morning, the children's tearful goodbyes making the departure more difficult than Quentin had anticipated. Emma had to be pried from Tessa's skirts, and even stoic William had suspiciously bright eyes as they waved from the porch. The first day of travel passed quietly. Tessa sat beside him on the wagon bench, occasionally pointing out wildflowers or asking questions about the landscape. They made camp as the sun began to set, Quentin quickly building a fire while Tessa prepared a simple meal from the provisions they'd brought. As they ate, the vast Montana sky darkened above them, stars emerging one by one until the heavens were ablaze with light. It's beautiful, Tessa murmured, gazing upward. I never tire of it. Nor I, Quentin agreed, watching how the firelight played across her features. It was one of the things that drew me west. The endless sky. The feeling that anything was possible out here. Is it? She asked. Possible, I mean. Quentin considered the question. Yes and no. The land gives opportunities, but it takes just as much. Sometimes more. Tessa nodded thoughtfully. Thomas used to say that life doesn't give us what we want, but what we need to become who we're meant to be. Your husband sounds wiser than me, Quentin said with a slight smile. Different, Tessa corrected. Not wiser. He couldn't have built what you have, raised 4 children alone while running a ranch. And I couldn't have taught school or quoted poetry, Quentin returned. Tessa laughed, the sound bright in the night. You might surprise yourself. They continued talking as the fire burned low, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their disappointments. It was the longest conversation Quentin had had with anyone in years, and he found himself reluctant for it to end. When Tessa finally retired to the wagon to sleep, Quentin remained by the fire, troubled by emotions he hadn't expected. There was an ease between them that felt dangerous, a connection forming that would only lead to pain when they reached Helena. The second day brought challenges. A wheel on Tessa's wagon began giving trouble, requiring frequent stops for adjustments. By midday, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and Quentin eyed them with concern. We should find shelter, he said as the first distant rumble of thunder reached them. That storm looks mean. They were fortunate to find an abandoned line shack just as the rain began to fall. It was small and dusty, but sound enough to keep them dry. Quentin tended to the horses while Tessa swept out the worst of the dirt and set up their meager camp inside. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity, rain lashing against the small structure while lightning split the sky. Inside, they huddled near the small fire Quentin had built in the rudimentary fireplace. Will the children be frightened? Tessa asked, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Quentin shook his head. William will look after the younger ones. And my father, for all his aches and pains, is still good in a crisis. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making Tessa jump. Without thinking, Quentin put his arm around her. She stiffened momentarily, then relaxed against him. "Sorry," she murmured. "I've never liked storms." "No need to apologize," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "The fury of nature demands respect." They sat like that, her head eventually coming to rest against his shoulder, until the storm began to subside. When Quentin finally realized the position they were in, he cleared his throat awkwardly and withdrew his arm. "I should check the horses," he said, standing quickly. Outside, the rain had lessened to a gentle patter. The horses were fine in the lean he'd constructed, but Quentin stayed with them longer than necessary, trying to calm his racing heart. What was he doing? Tessa was bound for Helena, for a new life. Tomorrow or the next day, he would leave her there and return to his children, his ranch, his life. These feelings, whatever they were, had no place in reality. When he finally returned to the shack, Tessa had laid out their supper. They ate in somewhat awkward silence, both seemingly aware of the shift that had occurred between them. "Thank you," Tessa said suddenly. Quentin looked up. "For what?" "For escorting me. For repairing my wagon. For—" she hesitated. "For making me feel safe. Anyone would have done the same," he demurred. Tessa shook her head. "No, they wouldn't. I've encountered enough people on my journey to know that kindness isn't always freely given." Quentin shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "You were kind to my children, to my father. The debt is mine." "There's no debt between friends," Tessa said softly. "Friends. Yes, that's what they were. All they could be." Quentin nodded, accepting the designation even as something within him rebelled against its limitations. They slept on opposite sides of the small room that night, but Quentin lay awake listening to Tessa's gentle breathing, wondering what might have been in another life, under different circumstances. Morning brought clearing skies but muddy roads. They set out nonetheless, both aware that their journey would soon end. Conversation came less easily than before. A strange tension now stretched between them. By late afternoon of the third day, the outline of Helena appeared in the distance. The mining town had grown substantially since Quentin had last visited, new buildings sprawling outward from the gulch where gold had first been discovered. "It's larger than I expected," Tessa remarked as they approached. "It's grown quickly," Quentin agreed. "Gold and silver do that." They navigated the bustling streets, Quentin directing the wagon toward the address Tessa had provided. It was on a relatively respectable street, with several shops including the millinery owned by her cousin. As they pulled up in front, a woman who bore a slight resemblance to Tessa emerged, her expression changing from curiosity to delight. "Tessa! At last!" she cried, rushing forward. "Olivia!" Tessa greeted her cousin with a warm embrace. Quentin remained on the wagon, feeling suddenly superfluous as the women reunited. A man joined them, Olivia's husband, presumably, and helped unload Tessa's trunk. Finally, Tessa turned back to him. "Quentin, please meet my cousin Olivia and her husband, Samuel Parker. This is Quentin Holcomb. He's been kind enough to repair my wagon and escort me here after I had an accident on the road." Handshakes and thanks were exchanged, and then an awkward silence fell. "Won't you stay for supper, Mr. Holcomb?" Olivia invited. "It's the least we can do to thank you." Quentin shook his head. "Thank you, madam, but I should start back. I have children waiting." "4 of them," Tessa added, her expression unreadable. "And they'll be missing their father." Another round of thanks followed, and then it was time. Quentin found himself standing before Tessa, hat in hand, searching for adequate words. "Safe travels, Mr. Holcomb," she said formally, extending her hand. He took it, holding it perhaps a moment too long. "And you have a good life here, Miss Nelson." Their eyes held, and Quentin thought he saw a flicker of regret in hers before she withdrew her hand and stepped back. With a final nod to the Parkers, Quentin mounted his horse. He'd leave Tessa's wagon with her as agreed and turned toward home. He didn't look back, couldn't bear to see her standing with her new life while he returned to his old one. The journey home seemed interminable. Quentin pushed himself and his horse, stopping only when absolutely necessary, driven by a restlessness he couldn't name, or wouldn't. For days later, he crested the final ridge that overlooked his ranch. The sight of it, the modest house, the barn, the corrals struck him differently now. It wasn't just his livelihood or his legacy. It was a home that had briefly come alive again in Tessa's presence, only to fall silent with her departure. His children ran to greet him as he rode into the yard, their excited voices washing over him as they all tried to speak at once. His father emerged more slowly, eyeing him with a knowing look that Quentin chose to ignore. Life resumed its familiar pattern. Quentin worked from dawn till dusk, caring for his cattle, maintaining the ranch, providing for his children. But something had changed. He found himself noticing the empty spaces more, the corners that needed sweeping, the meals that were functional rather than joyful, the silence in the evenings where stories had briefly flourished. The children asked about Tessa frequently at first, then less often as weeks passed. Only Emma remained steadfast, asking nearly every night when Miss Tessa would return. Each time, Quentin explained gently that she had her own life in Helena now, but the disappointment in his daughter's eyes mirrored something in his own heart. One evening, about 2 months after Tessa's departure, Quentin sat on the porch watching the sunset. His father joined him, settling into the other chair with a grunt. "You're a damn fool, son," the older man said without preamble. Quentin raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? That woman brought light back into this house, into you, and you let her ride away. She had plans, Pa. A life waiting for her in Helena." His father snorted. "Plans change. Life changes. But some things, important things, only come along once or twice if you're lucky. She never gave any indication, because you never asked." His father interrupted. "I saw how she looked at you, how you looked at her, when she thought no one was watching." Quentin stared out at the darkening sky. "It's too late now, is it?" his father challenged. "Last I checked, Helena's still standing where it was, and you've got 2 good legs to carry you there. And what about the children? The ranch? I can't just leave." The older man waved a dismissive hand. "I'm not dead yet. The Morgans would help. A week won't ruin everything you've built." Quentin shook his head. "Even if I went, what would I say? Sorry to disturb your new life, but I can't stop thinking about you." "That's a start," his father said dryly. They sat in silence for a while before the older Holcomb spoke again, his voice gentler. "Your mother's been gone 15 years now. Not a day passes I don't miss her. But if she were here, she'd be the first to tell you that loving once doesn't mean you can't love again." With that, he stood and left Quentin alone with his thoughts. The idea, once planted, refused to leave. Quentin found himself thinking of Helena, of Tessa, at odd moments throughout his days. When Emma asked yet again when Miss Tessa would return, he found himself without an adequate answer. A week later, a letter arrived from the bank in Helena. The cattle buyer who usually purchased Quentin's stock was looking to buy early this year. Would he be able to drive his herd to Helena by the end of the month? Quentin stared at the letter, a strange feeling sweeping through him. Coincidence? Or opportunity? That evening, he discussed it with his father, who tried and failed to hide his satisfaction. "Take William with you," the older man suggested. "He's old enough to help with a drive, and the experience will be good for him. The rest of us will manage here." And so it was decided. Quentin and William, along with 2 hired hands, would drive 50 head of cattle to Helena. The preparations kept them busy for the next week, but underneath the activity, Quentin's thoughts repeatedly turned to what might happen when he reached the city. The drive itself was uneventful, if tiring. William proved himself capable beyond his years, his obvious pride in being included warming Quentin's heart. They reached Helena in good time, delivered the cattle to the buyer, and received payment that exceeded expectations. "Can we go to town, Pa?" William asked excitedly as they left the stockyards. "I've never seen a real city before." "That's exactly where we're heading," Quentin replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the nervousness building within him. They stabled their horses at a livery and walked through the bustling streets. Helena had grown even in the few months since Quentin had last visited, prosperity evident in the new construction and well-dressed citizens. William's eyes were wide as he took in the sights: the ornate storefronts, the ladies in fashionable dresses, the various businesses advertising their wares. Quentin guided him through the crowds, his heart pounding as they approached the street where the Parkers' millinery shop stood. And then they were there, standing before a neatly painted storefront with elegant hats displayed in the window. A sign proclaimed Parker's Fine Millinery in gold lettering. "Why are we stopping here, Pa?" William asked, puzzled. "We don't need hats." Quentin took a deep breath. "There's someone I want to see, son. Someone who was kind to us." Understanding dawned on William's face. "Miss Tessa? She's here." Quentin nodded. "This is her cousin's shop. I thought we might say hello." William's face split into a grin. "Emma will be so jealous." Despite his anxiety, Quentin smiled at his son's enthusiasm. "Let's go in, shall we?" A small bell announced their entrance. The shop was elegantly appointed, with hats of various styles displayed on stands and shelves. A woman Quentin recognized as Olivia Parker looked up from where she was assisting a customer. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Holcomb? Mrs. Parker." He greeted her with a nod. "I hope we're not interrupting your business." "Not at all," she assured him, quickly finishing with her customer before approaching them. "What brings you to Helena?" "Cattle business," Quentin explained. "And I thought, that is, we wondered if Miss Nelson might be available." Olivia's expression changed, something like concern crossing her features. "Tessa? She's not here at the moment." Quentin's heart sank. "I see. Perhaps another time, then." "No, I mean," Olivia hesitated. "She's not working in the shop anymore. She's been teaching at the school since their regular teacher fell ill." Relief flooded through him. "She's still in Helena, then?" Olivia nodded, studying him curiously. "The school day should be ending soon. It's just 3 blocks east, on Pine Street." Quentin thanked her and they left the shop. William was practically bouncing with excitement as they headed toward the school. "Do you think she'll be surprised to see us, Pa?" he asked. "I expect so," Quentin replied, nervousness returning tenfold. The schoolhouse was a modest wooden building with a small bell tower. As they approached, the bell began to ring, and moments later, children of various ages poured out the doors, their school day complete. Quentin and William waited at a respectful distance, watching as the students dispersed. Finally, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway, bidding farewell to the last few children. Tessa looked different somehow, perhaps more confident, her posture straighter, her movements more assured. But her smile as she spoke to the children was the same one that had brightened his home months ago. William could contain himself no longer. "Miss Tessa," he called out, waving enthusiastically. She turned, her expression transforming from confusion to shock to delight in the span of seconds. "William? Is that really you?" The boy ran forward, and Tessa knelt to embrace him, laughing with surprise. "My goodness, you've grown. What are you doing in Helena?" "We brought cattle to sell," William explained proudly. And Pa wanted to see you. Tessa's eyes lifted then, finding Quentin where he stood several paces back. Her smile faltered slightly, uncertainty replacing joy. "Hello, Tessa," he said, removing his hat as he stepped closer. "Quentin," she replied, her voice soft. "This is unexpected." They stood regarding each other, the busy street fading away around them. William looked between them, then announced, "I'm going to look at that store over there," pointing to a nearby mercantile. "Stay where I can see you," Quentin called after him, grateful for his son's perceptiveness. Alone or as alone as one could be on a public street, they faced each other awkwardly. "You're teaching," Quentin observed, gesturing to the schoolhouse. Tessa nodded. "The regular teacher broke his leg. It was meant to be temporary, but he's decided to return east. They've asked me to stay on permanently." "That suits you," Quentin said. "Better than selling hats, I'd imagine." A small smile touched her lips. "Yes, I've always loved children. And teaching was Thomas's passion. It feels right somehow, continuing that legacy." Quentin nodded, searching for the words he'd rehearsed countless times on the journey. None of them seemed adequate now. "How are the children?" Tessa asked, filling the silence. "And your father?" "They're well," Quentin replied. "They miss you, especially Emma. She asks about you almost every day." Something like pain flashed in Tessa's eyes. "I miss them too, more than I expected." Another silence fell between them, heavier this time. "Tessa, Quentin began, just as she said, They both stopped. Then Quentin gestured for her to continue. "I should get back to my cousins," she said. "They'll be wondering where I am." Disappointment washed through him. "Of course, I didn't mean to keep you." Tessa hesitated, then asked, "How long will you be in Helena?" "Just until tomorrow," Quentin answered. "We need to start back in the morning." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "It was good to see you, Quentin. And William, please give my love to the others." "I will," he promised, watching as she gathered her things, preparing to leave. This was it, then. The moment slipping away, the words still unsaid. Quentin felt a desperation rise within him. "Tessa, wait!" he called as she turned to go. She paused, looking back at him with those green eyes that had haunted his dreams for months. "I missed you," he said simply, the truth of it evident in his voice. "We all did." "The house hasn't been the same since you left." Her expression softened. "Quentin, I know you have a life here," he continued quickly. "A position you enjoy, family nearby. I'm not asking you to give that up. But I couldn't leave Helena without telling you that I think about you. Every day." Tessa's eyes widened. "You do." Quentin nodded, taking a step closer. "You brought something back into our home that I thought died with Sarah. Not just cooking and cleaning, but laughter, stories, life." Tessa's cheeks flushed. "I've thought about you too. All of you. I even considered writing, but I wasn't sure if that would be welcome." "It would have been," Quentin assured her. "Very much so." They stood regarding each other, the possibility of something new hanging in the air between them. "Would you have dinner with us tonight?" Quentin asked finally. "William would be overjoyed, and I'd like the chance to talk more. Away from the street." Tessa smiled, the genuine warmth of it sending his heart racing. "I'd like that very much." They agreed on a time and place, and Tessa departed with a promise to meet them later. Quentin watched her go, a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. William rejoined him, his expression hopeful. "Is Miss Tessa coming home with us, Pa?" "Not yet, son," Quentin replied honestly. "But she's joining us for dinner. And sometimes, that's how new beginnings start." The boy considered this, then nodded sagely. "Emma will still be jealous." Quentin laughed, ruffling his son's hair as they headed back toward the center of town. Dinner that evening was everything Quentin had hoped for. Tessa arrived wearing a simple but becoming blue dress, her hair arranged more elegantly than he'd seen before. William monopolized much of the conversation at first, regaling her with tales of everything that had happened at the ranch since her departure. As the meal progressed, however, the conversation shifted to more substantive matters. "Do you truly enjoy teaching?" Quentin asked as they lingered over coffee. Tessa nodded. "More than I expected. It challenges me in ways selling hats never could. And the children, there's something wonderful about watching them learn. Seeing that moment of understanding dawn. Like when you taught Mary to thread a needle," Quentin recalled. "Exactly," Tessa agreed, her eyes warm with the memory. "There's such satisfaction in it." "Helena is fortunate to have you," Quentin said sincerely. Tessa studied him for a moment. "Earlier you said you thought about me. What did you mean by that?" William, sensing an adult conversation developing, became suddenly fascinated by the dessert menu. Quentin took a deep breath. "I meant that I've wondered if I made a mistake, letting you leave without saying something. Without asking if there might be a place for you in our lives, in my life beyond those few days." Tessa's expression grew serious. "Quentin, I'm not looking to replace Sarah. I couldn't, even if I wanted to." "I know that," he assured her. "Just as you know I couldn't replace Thomas. But perhaps there's room in life for second chances. New beginnings." Tessa's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that life is unpredictable and often too short," Quentin said, finding courage in her attentiveness. "That connections like the one we shared are rare, and that I'd like to explore what it might mean for us, for the children, if you were to consider a future that included us." "You live 3 days' journey from Helena," Tessa pointed out, though her tone wasn't dismissive. "Distance can be overcome," Quentin countered. "Feelings are harder to find." A soft smile touched her lips. "You're more poetic than you give yourself credit for." "Only when properly inspired," he returned with a smile of his own. William, apparently deciding the conversation was acceptable to rejoin, asked, "Does this mean Miss Tessa might come visit us again?" Tessa's eyes met Quentin's over the boy's head. "I think that might be arranged, if your father is agreeable." "More than agreeable," Quentin confirmed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. They parted that evening with plans made for Tessa to visit the ranch during the school's upcoming break. It wasn't a declaration of undying love or a promise of forever, but it was a beginning, a chance to see if what had sparked between them in those few days could grow into something enduring. The journey home passed quickly, Quentin's spirits buoyed by possibility. William, sworn to secrecy about Tessa's planned visit, practically vibrated with the effort of keeping the news to himself. The reunion with Emma, Mary, and James was joyful, all 3 children exclaiming over the small gifts Quentin had brought from Helena. His father watched with knowing eyes as Quentin recounted their travels, carefully omitting any mention of Tessa. That night, after the children were asleep, the older man cornered him on the porch. "Well?" he demanded without preamble. Quentin couldn't suppress his smile. "She's coming to visit. Next month, when the school term ends." His father's weathered face creased into a grin. "About damn time. The children will be over the moon." "They don't know yet," Quentin cautioned. "I want to be sure it happens before I get their hopes up." The older man nodded sagely. "Wise. But I'll wager my best pipe she comes. I saw how she looked at you, at all of us. She belongs here more than she belongs in that city." The weeks that followed were filled with preparations. Quentin found himself making repairs he'd put off for years, fixing the loose porch step, repainting the shutters, replacing the cracked window in the spare room. The children noticed the flurry of activity but attributed it to the coming spring. When the letter arrived confirming Tessa's visit, Quentin finally shared the news. The children's reactions were everything he'd anticipated: pure joy from the younger ones, cautious optimism from William, who already knew, and a knowing smile from his father. The day of Tessa's arrival dawned clear and warm. Quentin had arranged to meet her stagecoach in the nearest town, leaving the children with his father despite their protests that they wanted to come along. "You'll see her soon enough," he promised as he saddled his horse. "And this way you can finish getting everything ready." The children had insisted on preparing for Tessa's visit in their own ways. Mary had picked wildflowers to arrange in a vase, James had drawn a picture to welcome her, and Emma had helped her grandfather bake cookies, albeit with more enthusiasm than skill. Quentin reached town with time to spare, his stomach nodding with anticipation as he waited for the stage. When it finally arrived in a cloud of dust, he found himself holding his breath as passengers began to disembark. And then she was there, looking travel-worn but smiling as she spotted him. Quentin moved forward to help her down, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps longer than strictly necessary. "You came," he said, the simple statement conveying his relief. Tessa's smile widened. "I promised I would." The journey back to the ranch was filled with conversation as Tessa shared news of Helena and Quentin updated her on the children's activities. There was an ease between them that felt both familiar and new, comfortable yet thrilling. As they approached the ranch, Quentin felt a momentary apprehension. What if things had changed? What if the connection they'd felt didn't translate to this new context? His fears proved groundless. The moment the children spotted them riding up, they erupted from the house in a flurry of excitement, running to meet them before the horse had fully stopped. "Miss Tessa! Miss Tessa!" they cried, surrounding them as Quentin helped her dismount. Tessa knelt to embrace each child in turn, her eyes bright with unshed tears as Emma clung to her neck, refusing to let go. "I missed you so much," the little girl whispered fiercely. "And I missed you," Tessa replied, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you." Even William, attempting to maintain his newfound maturity, couldn't resist joining the group embrace. Quentin's father stood on the porch, watching the scene with undisguised satisfaction. When they finally made it to the house, he embraced Tessa warmly. "Welcome back," he said simply, but the words held layers of meaning. "It's good to be back," Tessa replied, her eyes meeting Quentin's over the older man's shoulder. The days that followed took on a magical quality. Tessa slipped back into their lives as though she'd never left, yet everything felt new. She taught the girls more advanced sewing techniques, helped James with his reading, and took long walks with William during which they discussed books and ideas. Emma simply followed her everywhere, soaking up the feminine attention she'd lacked for most of her short life. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Quentin and Tessa would sit on the porch, talking until the stars wheeled overhead. They spoke of their pasts, of Sarah and Thomas, of dreams realized and abandoned, of the unexpected turns life had taken. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after Thomas died," Tessa admitted one night, her face silvered by moonlight. "I thought that part of my life was over." "I felt the same after Sarah," Quentin replied, reaching for her hand across the space between their chairs. It seemed impossible that the heart could heal enough to risk breaking again. Tessa's fingers intertwined with his. "Yet here we are." "Here we are," he agreed, marveling at the simple rightness of her hand in his. As Tessa's visit neared its end, a palpable tension began to build. The unspoken question of what came next hung between them during their evening conversations, neither quite ready to broach the subject. It was Emma who forced the issue, tearfully asking at breakfast why Miss Tessa had to leave again. "Because Miss Tessa has her own life in Helena," Quentin explained gently. Her teaching position, her cousin's family. But we need her more, Emma protested. She belongs with us. The table fell silent, all eyes moving between Emma, Quentin, and Tessa, who sat with her cheeks flushed. Emma, that's not our decision to make, Quentin said finally. Miss Tessa has to choose what's best for her life. What if I want to be part of your lives? Tessa asked quietly. Quentin's heart stuttered. What are you saying? Tessa took a deep breath. I've been offered the teaching position permanently in Helena. It's a good opportunity. But being here these past 2 weeks has made me realize something. What's that? Quentin prompted when she hesitated. That a position, a job, it's just that. But family, connection, belonging. That's something rarer. Her eyes met his, steady and certain. I can teach anywhere. But what we have here, what we could have, I can't find that just anywhere. The children watched with wide eyes as Quentin stood, moving around the table to kneel beside Tessa's chair. Are you saying you want to stay? He asked, hardly daring to hope. Tessa nodded, her eyes bright. If you'll have me, if there's a place for me here. There has been since the moment you walked in, Quentin said, his voice rough with emotion. I think there always was meant to be. His father cleared his throat loudly. Children, I believe it's time to check on those new calves in the north pasture. The older man herded the protesting children outside, leaving Quentin and Tessa alone in the kitchen. I don't want to rush this, Quentin said, still kneeling beside her. I want to do right by you, by the children. I know, Tessa replied, reaching out to touch his face. I'm not asking for promises yet. Just the chance to see if this can be what I think it could. Quentin turned his face to press a kiss into her palm. Stay, not as a visitor or a guest, but to make a life here. With us. With me. Tessa's smile was like the sunrise. Yes. The weeks and months that followed weren't without challenges. Tessa secured a position teaching at the small school 6 miles from the ranch, riding there each day on a gentle mare Quentin provided. The children adjusted to her more permanent presence, occasionally testing boundaries as they determined where she fit in their family structure. There were practical matters to resolve: where she would live, in the small and used cabin on the property until propriety could be satisfied. How her possessions would be transported from Helena, by wagon, with much help from neighbors, and how their relationship would progress, slowly, with intention and care. Through it all, the connection between Quentin and Tessa deepened. They discovered shared values, complementary strengths, and the ability to disagree without discord. She brought softness to his pragmatism. He provided stability for her idealism. The children flourished under their combined care. Emma particularly blossomed, finally having the maternal guidance she'd missed. William found in Tessa a mind that matched his curiosity, while Mary and James thrived with the consistent attention she provided. On a crisp autumn evening, nearly 6 months after Tessa had come to stay, Quentin proposed properly. It wasn't an elaborate affair, just the two of them by the creek that ran through the property, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I never thought I'd love again after Sarah died, he said, holding both her hands in his. I thought that part of me died with her. But you showed me that home isn't a place, or even a person, it's a feeling. A sense of belonging and rightness that I found again with you. Tears glistened in Tessa's eyes as she listened. I'm not a poetic man, Quentin continued, but I know that loving you doesn't diminish what I felt for Sarah, just as loving me doesn't erase what you had with Thomas. They're part of who we are, who we've become. And who we are now together feels right in a way I can't quite explain. You don't need to explain, Tessa said softly. I feel it too. Quentin knelt then, producing a simple gold band. Tessa Nelson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making this family truly whole again? Yes, she answered without hesitation. With all my heart, yes. They were married that December, in a simple ceremony attended by neighbors and friends. Quentin's father, prouder than anyone had seen him in years, stood as his best man. The children participated eagerly, William carrying the rings, Mary scattering flower petals, James escorting Emma, who carried a small bouquet matching Tessa's. As they spoke their vows, Quentin marveled at life's unexpected turns. He had never planned to love again, never imagined that a broken wagon axle would lead to healing his broken family. Yet here they stood, creating something new from the pieces of their pasts. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The ranch prospered under their combined care, and Tessa's garden flourished along the southern wall of the house. The school term ended with a celebration in which all 4 Holcomb children participated proudly, their stepmother beaming as they recited poems and demonstrated their learning. And then, as summer approached, Tessa shared news that completed their joy. A new Holcomb would join their family by winter's return. On a warm evening, as twilight gathered and the first stars appeared, Quentin and Tessa sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard. Emma's laughter rang out as William spun her in circles, while Mary and James raced around them in some game of their own invention. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tessa asked, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. "When you found me cooking in your kitchen that day?" Quentin shook his head, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Never. I was too caught in what I'd lost to see what might be found." "And now?" she prompted, leaning into his embrace. "Now I know that home isn't a place. It's not even a person," Quentin said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It's this all of us together. A family built not just from birth, but from choice, from love." Tessa's smile was radiant in the gathering darkness. "I like that definition." As night fell completely, they called the children in for supper. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with voices and laughter, with stories and songs, with the 1,000 small sounds that make a house a home. And in the heart of it all, a man who had once believed home died with his wife discovered that love, like the prairie itself, could bloom again after even the harshest winter.